Do you know what happens when a letter written by a dying mother is discovered after 25 years of silence? Hidden inside an old poetry book, untouched, unopened, unseen. A secret so powerful that it could change everything you thought you knew about the royal family. And now it has finally been found. By the time you finish this video, you will understand exactly what Diana wrote in her final weeks and why her words have left the entire United Kingdom in shock. But before we go any further, let me ask you something. If you found a letter from someone you loved, written in their final days, would you share it with the world or keep it buried forever? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this question has divided the royal family for decades. And hit subscribe to Royal Talks TV, because we bring you the stories the palace doesn't want you to hear. It started like any other day at Althorp House. Charles Spencer, Princess Diana's younger brother, was conducting a routine inspection of the estate's vast library collection. Centuries of family history surrounded him, books that had witnessed generations of Spencer family secrets. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for what was waiting among those forgotten shelves. His attention fell on an old, well-worn copy of John Donne's Holy Sonnets, a book that had remained untouched for decades. It looked no different from countless other antique volumes surrounding it. Yet hidden inside was a secret that had quietly survived the passage of time. As Charles gently pulled the book from the shelf, something unexpected happened. A thick, cream-colored envelope slipped from deep within the binding and landed softly on the floor. Curious, he bent down to pick it up. The paper had been remarkably preserved, protected for 25 years inside the old poetry book. On the back was a deep crimson wax seal that remained completely intact. No one had ever opened it. Whatever message was hidden inside had remained locked away since the day it was written. Then Charles turned the envelope over, and everything changed. The elegant, familiar handwriting instantly caught his eye. There was no mistaking it. It belonged to his sister, Princess Diana. For a brief moment, memories of her rushed back with overwhelming force. He expected the letter to be addressed to one of her sons, Prince William or Prince Harry. Perhaps a close friend, a trusted advisor. Instead, the name written across the front left him completely speechless. The letter was addressed to Princess Anne. Charles could hardly believe what he was seeing. For years, newspapers, television programs, and royal commentators had painted Diana and Anne as two women who could barely tolerate one another. They were often described as complete opposites. Diana warm and emotional, Anne reserved, disciplined, and fiercely loyal to the monarchy. The public had accepted that story for decades without question. Yet the unopened letter resting in Charles Spencer's hands told a very different story. In a single breathtaking moment, one forgotten envelope threatened to unravel years of royal rumors and challenge everything the world thought it knew about the relationship between Princess Diana and Princess Anne. But here's where it gets even more chilling. The letter wasn't just a personal note. It was a warning. Before we get to what Diana actually wrote, we need to understand why this letter matters so much to Charles Spencer. Because this discovery wasn't just about history. It was about a promise. Towards the end of the 20th century, Charles Spencer unexpectedly became one of Britain's most closely watched public figures. Although he had spent much of his life away from the constant spotlight that surrounded his famous sister, everything changed after Diana's heartbreaking death on August 31st, 1997. As the world struggled to process the loss of the people's princess, Charles found himself standing before millions at her funeral in Westminster Abbey, carrying not only the grief of a devastated brother, but also the hopes of those who believed Diana deserved justice. His funeral speech quickly became one of the most unforgettable moments of that historic day. It was far more than a tribute. It was an emotional message filled with love, sorrow, and determination. Speaking from the heart, Charles criticized the relentless media attention that had followed Diana throughout her life. But it was his promise that truly captured the world's attention. Standing before the royal family and millions of viewers watching across the globe, Charles made a heartfelt pledge on behalf of Diana's family. He promised they would do everything within their power to protect Prince William and Prince Harry, and help them grow with the kindness, compassion, and independence their mother had worked so hard to teach them. He vowed that their lives would never be shaped only by royal expectations, duty, and tradition, but also by the humanity Diana had always wanted them to keep. Those powerful words became one of the defining moments of Charles Spencer's life. Nearly 3 decades later, that unforgettable promise suddenly returned to him unexpectedly. Standing alone inside the peaceful library at Althorp House, Charles found himself holding Princess Diana's long-lost letter addressed to Princess Anne. As he looked at his sister's familiar handwriting, memories of that emotional day inside Westminster Abbey came rushing back with remarkable clarity. The letter was no longer simply a forgotten piece of royal history hidden for 25 years. To Charles, it felt like one final opportunity to keep the promise he had made beside Diana's coffin. But then he broke the seal, and what he read made his blood run cold. Charles Spencer stared at the sealed envelope for what felt like an eternity. Every instinct told him that once the wax seal was broken, there would be no turning back. The letter had remained hidden for 25 years, untouched by time and unseen by anyone. Whatever Princess Diana had chosen to write during the final weeks of her life had stayed locked away, waiting for this very moment. Taking a slow, steady breath, Charles carefully broke the deep crimson wax seal and unfolded the aged pages inside. From the very first lines, he realized this was unlike anything he had expected. Diana's words carried a sense of urgency, not personal sorrow. She was not seeking sympathy or writing about her own pain. Instead, every line revealed the heart of a worried mother determined to protect her sons. She expressed deep concerns about powerful figures within the royal household, whom she believed were trying to influence William's future. Her greatest fear was that they would slowly change the compassionate child she had raised, taking away his kindness, independence, and empathy to make him fit a stricter royal image. As Charles continued reading, another remarkable truth became impossible to ignore. Diana explained that she believed Princess Anne was the only person who truly understood how the royal system operated from the inside. Anne had survived its pressures without allowing it to completely change who she was. Diana trusted that strength more than anyone else, and believed Anne possessed both the courage and authority to protect William if she was no longer there to do so herself. Then Charles reached the final part of the page. Near the bottom, Diana mentioned one of the mysterious figures she had privately called the Men in Grey. But this time, she did something far more extraordinary than hint at their influence. She identified one of them by name. Charles felt his heart pound as he read the words again, struggling to believe what he was seeing. This was no vague suspicion or passing concern. It was a direct warning, written by Diana herself. In that unforgettable moment, Charles became convinced that his sister had recognized a dangerous plan taking shape long before the tragedy in Paris. But that wasn't all. The letter revealed something even more terrifying, and it involved someone who was still inside the palace. Charles Spencer knew almost immediately that the letter could never be treated like an ordinary historical discovery. Its contents were far too personal, far too important, and far too powerful to become another sensational newspaper headline. If it reached the media first, there was every chance that Diana's final words would be misunderstood, twisted, or reduced to endless public speculation. Charles believed his sister deserved better than that. More importantly, he believed her message needed to reach the one person she had trusted enough to write it for in the first place. Without wasting any time, Charles reached for a private communication line connected to Buckingham Palace, one that had remained silent since the difficult days following Diana's funeral in 1997. It was not a call he ever expected to make again. Yet the discovery of the forgotten letter left him with no other choice. He asked for an immediate and completely private meeting with Princess Anne, refusing to explain anything over the telephone, except one detail that instantly changed everything. He told them he was holding a sealed letter written by Princess Diana. The following morning, Charles traveled to Gatcombe Park, Princess Anne's peaceful country home. The atmosphere felt unusually quiet as he arrived, carrying the carefully protected envelope that had remained hidden for 25 years. When Anne entered the room, Charles gently placed the letter before her. For a brief moment, she simply looked at it without speaking. Then her eyes settled on the handwriting. She recognized it immediately. The familiar writing transported her back to a time filled with painful memories, difficult choices, and emotions she had spent decades keeping hidden behind a calm public image. The Princess Anne the world believed it knew, disciplined, reserved, almost impossible to read, suddenly seemed very different. As she carefully lifted the letter into her hands, her composure began to weaken. The years of silence, the grief she had carried alone, the memories she had buried so deeply, slowly surfaced once again. Charles watched quietly, realizing he was witnessing something almost no one had ever seen. This was not the distant royal figure often portrayed by the public. This was a woman confronting the handwritten words of someone she had known far better than the world had ever realized. And then she started to read. And everything changed. As Princess Anne carefully unfolded the letter and began reading Diana's words, memories she had kept buried for decades came rushing back with unexpected force. Each line seemed to pull her deeper into a chapter of royal history she had tried hard to leave behind. The quiet room around her faded as her mind returned to Balmoral. During the painful years when the marriage between King Charles and Princess Diana was falling apart. It had been one of the most difficult periods the royal family had ever faced, with growing tension behind closed doors and relentless public attention outside them. For years, newspapers had painted a simple picture of the relationship between Diana and Anne. Headlines often suggested the two women were distant, uncomfortable around each other, and unable to build any real friendship. Many people accepted that version of events without question. Anne was described as cold, reserved, and unsympathetic, while Diana was portrayed as isolated and alone. But as Anne continued reading the letter, it became painfully clear that the truth had been far more complicated than anyone outside the palace had ever known. Behind closed doors, Anne had quietly stepped in more than once when Diana found herself under enormous pressure. She had challenged influential royal aides when they pushed too hard, refused to let them intimidate Diana, and used her own authority to protect her whenever she believed the situation had gone too far. Anne understood how the royal institution worked better than almost anyone else. And although she rarely showed emotion in public, she had never stopped paying attention to what Diana was going through. One memory stood out above all the others. During a particularly tense moment, Anne had pulled Diana aside and offered a simple but unforgettable piece of advice. She quietly told her never to let those determined to control her see her weakness. because once they believed they had broken her spirit, they would only push harder. It was advice born from years of personal experience inside one of the world's most demanding institutions. As Anne lowered the letter, she finally spoke the truth she had carried in silence for so many years. She had never hated Diana. What she hated was watching an extraordinary woman slowly become the center of a painful public spectacle that seemed determined to destroy her. Then she reached the part of the letter that made her freeze. And what she read would change everything. Everything changed the moment Princess Anne reached one particular part of Diana's letter. Until then, she had been quietly reading through the handwritten pages, carefully taking in every word. But as her eyes moved farther down the page, her expression suddenly changed. The calm, controlled woman who had faced years of public pressure without showing much emotion seemed visibly shaken. Charles Spencer immediately sensed that she had come across something far more serious than either of them had expected. Anne slowly looked up from the letter, her face pale with disbelief. After a long silence, she revealed that Diana had identified, by name, the senior courtier she feared more than anyone else. This was not simply another palace official. According to the letter, he was someone Diana believed held considerable influence behind the scenes, quietly shaping important decisions while remaining almost invisible to the public. She had long suspected that he was part of the powerful circle she privately referred to as the men in gray. And then shared something that left Charles struggling to process what he was hearing. She explained that the very same courtier Diana had warned about was later assigned to play a significant role in Prince William's life following his mother's death. Diana believed his purpose was not only to guide the young prince, but also to reshape him according to the expectations of the royal institution. Even more disturbing was Anne's belief that the same official had been involved in changes to Diana's security arrangements during the days leading up to the tragic car crash in Paris. Charles could hardly believe the connection that was unfolding before him. His mind raced as memories of Diana's fears, her growing sense of isolation, and the desperate tone of the letter suddenly began to fit together in a way they never had before. What had once seemed like scattered concerns now appeared to form part of a much larger and more troubling picture. But Diana's letter revealed one more thing. Something Anne had never told anyone. Something that would change everything. Princess Anne slowly lowered the letter and sat in silence, overwhelmed by the memories Diana's words had brought back. After a long pause, she admitted to Charles Spencer that many of Diana's fears had not seemed unreasonable, even during the painful days after the tragedy in Paris. Deep inside, Anne had also sensed that something behind the scenes felt wrong. Certain decisions, unexplained events, powerful figures. These had raised questions over the years, but without clear proof, suspicion alone could never reveal the full truth. Anne explained that without solid proof, accusing powerful figures inside the royal household would have achieved very little. In fact, it could have done far more harm than good. Had she openly challenged the influential group Diana privately called the Men in Grey, she believed she would have been pushed aside, her voice dismissed, and perhaps most importantly, her access to Prince William and Prince Harry taken away. That was a risk she simply could not afford to take. Instead, Anne made a difficult choice that very few people ever understood. Rather than fighting from the outside, she stayed within the royal system. She accepted the public image of being reserved, distant, and emotionally guarded, if it meant remaining close enough to quietly watch over Diana's sons. It was not the path people expected, but Anne believed it gave her the best chance of protecting William and Harry during the years when they needed stability most. As Charles listened, another memory suddenly came rushing back. Only weeks after Diana's funeral, one senior courtier had unexpectedly disappeared from William's household. At the time, almost nobody questioned the quiet transfer. It had been explained as a routine change in responsibilities, and the story quickly faded from public attention. Anne slowly nodded when Charles mentioned the incident. She admitted that the courtier Diana had identified in her letter was indeed the same man. She had worked behind the scenes to remove him from William's immediate circle, effectively limiting his influence. But that was as far as she could go. Without undeniable evidence, exposing the wider network surrounding him was impossible. Now, as she looked once more at Diana's forgotten letter, Anne realized everything had changed. After 25 years, the proof she had been waiting for was finally resting in her hands. But then the telephone rang, and everything they feared was about to become real. The conversation came to an abrupt halt as Princess Anne's expression suddenly changed. Until that moment, both she and Charles Spencer had been focused entirely on the remarkable discovery lying before them. But Anne's years of experience inside the royal household made her notice dangers that others could easily overlook. A troubling thought crossed her mind, and she wasted no time sharing it. She quietly asked Charles a simple question. Had anyone else seen the letter before he left Althorp House? The question immediately sent Charles's thoughts racing back to the previous afternoon. He remembered the exact moment. The old envelope slipped from the pages of the book and landed on the library floor. More importantly, he remembered the arrival of the estate's senior archivist. Although the meeting had lasted only a few moments, the archivist had clearly noticed the cream-colored envelope before Charles managed to put it away. At the time, the encounter had seemed completely harmless. Now it felt far more significant. As Charles recalled every detail, the seriousness of the situation became impossible to ignore. The archivist was connected to official historical preservation work linked to royal estates. If word of the letter had already reached the wrong people, its discovery might no longer be a private matter. Anne understood how quickly information could travel through official palace channels, especially when it involved documents connected to Princess Diana. She warned Charles that if the influential figures Diana had once described as the men in gray learned about the letter, they would likely move without delay. An urgent historical inspection could easily be arranged under perfectly ordinary administrative procedures. Once inside Althorp, the letter could be taken into official custody, classified as sensitive royal material, and locked away from public view forever. Diana's final message could disappear once again, before anyone else ever had the chance to read it. Before either of them could decide what to do next, the silence inside Anne's study was suddenly broken. An encrypted red telephone resting on a nearby desk began to ring. Neither of them moved. The sharp sound echoed through the room, carrying a sense of urgency neither could ignore. Anne looked toward the telephone with quiet concern. She knew that line was used only for the most sensitive matters. Whoever was calling already sensed that something important had changed. And with every passing second, it became clear that time was quickly running out. The ringing telephone left both Charles Spencer and Princess Anne with the same troubling realization. The window to act was quickly closing. If powerful figures inside the royal institution were already aware that Diana's hidden letter had been found, they had very little time left to decide what to do next. Charles reacted first. The pressure of the moment overwhelmed him, and one solution seemed safer than any other. He suggested destroying the letter before anyone could take it away. In his mind, burning the pages would prevent them from falling into the wrong hands. It would also stop anyone from twisting Diana's words or locking them away forever under official secrecy. Although painful, he believed losing the letter might be better than allowing it to be used against the very people Diana had hoped to protect. Princess Anne firmly rejected Charles's suggestion, making it clear that destroying the letter was never an option. She believed Diana had carefully hidden it for a reason, preserving her words until the right moment arrived. Protected inside an old book beneath an untouched wax seal, the letter had survived for decades because Diana wanted her message to be discovered, not erased. To Anne, it was a truth waiting to be heard. Anne believed they owed Diana far more than silence. Charles then suggested sharing the letter with trusted newspapers, hoping responsible journalists might reveal its contents before it disappeared again. Once more, Anne shook her head. She knew how quickly headlines could distort even the most important stories. Endless debates, sensational reporting, and legal challenges could bury Diana's true message before the public ever understood it. Instead, Anne proposed something neither Charles nor anyone else could have imagined. Within hours, the annual Order of the Garter ceremony at St. George's Chapel would begin. It was one of the monarchy's most important public events, attended by senior members of the royal family and watched by journalists from around the world. Millions of people would be following the live broadcast. Anne believed that was exactly where Diana's letter belonged. If its contents were revealed before the world's cameras, no private meeting, official order, or last-minute intervention could quietly make it disappear. For the first time since the letter had been discovered, Charles realized they were no longer simply protecting Diana's final words. They were preparing to reveal them before the entire world. But there was one more person who needed to see it first. And when he did, everything changed. Before Princess Anne and Charles Spencer could put their remarkable plan into motion, there was one person who needed to see the letter above everyone else. Anne had already sent a discreet message through a secure private channel, asking Prince William to come immediately without attracting attention. She did not explain, only enough to make him understand that the matter could not wait. Not long afterward, William arrived. He had driven himself, leaving behind the usual royal convoy, sensing that whatever awaited him was deeply personal. The moment he stepped into the room, he noticed the serious expressions on the faces of his aunt and uncle. Neither of them spoke right away. The silence alone told him that something extraordinary had happened. Anne slowly lifted the aged cream-colored envelope and placed the carefully unfolded letter into William's hands. For a brief moment, he simply stared at the familiar handwriting. It had been almost 25 years since he had seen his mother's words written across a page. Gently, he began to read. As his eyes moved from one line to the next, the room fell completely silent. Every sentence revealed the heart of a mother who had never stopped thinking about her children. Even during the most difficult days of her own life, Diana was not writing out of fear for herself. She was writing because she feared what the future might hold for William and Harry. She understood the enormous pressures that came with life inside the royal institution, and worried that those forces could slowly change the compassionate young men she wanted her sons to become. Then William reached the passages where Diana explained why she had chosen Princess Anne. She believed Anne possessed a rare strength that few others inside the family had. More importantly, she trusted Anne to stand firm when it mattered most. She believed Anne would continue protecting her sons from the pressures she could already see gathering around them. William lowered the letter, deeply moved by what he had just read. For the first time, he fully understood that his mother's fight had never ended with her own struggles. Until the very end, she had been thinking about his future. And then something happened that nobody expected. William looked up from the letter, and for the first time in nearly 25 years, he spoke about his mother in a way that left everyone in the room fighting back tears. He said quietly, almost to himself. "I always knew she was watching over us. I just didn't know she had written it down. She was never afraid for herself. She was only afraid for us." Anne quietly broke the silence, confirming that she had honored Diana's trust for all those years. She had remained watchful, protected William and Harry whenever she could, and never forgotten the promise she had silently carried. With Charles standing beside them, the three family members reached the same conclusion. The forgotten letter could no longer remain hidden. Together, they prepared to carry Diana's final message into the very heart of the monarchy, determined to reveal what they believed had remained buried for 25 years, and ensure her voice would finally be heard. So now you know the truth behind Diana's lost letter. You know what she wrote, you know why she trusted Anne. But what happened next involves someone we haven't even talked about yet. And that story might be even more surprising. If you've made it this far, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell for Royal Talks TV. Because stories like this don't stay buried for long. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Should Diana's letter have been made public or kept private? Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.